What would you do if your HOA decided that your driveway was illegal and had your car towed, without warning, just because they didn't like the way it looked? For the homeowners in Willow Creek, this wasn't just a hypothetical nightmare. It was their daily reality under Karen Roberts, the iron-fisted president of the Homeowners Association. If you so much as left your trash cans out 10 minutes too long, she'd slap you with a fine. If your Christmas lights stayed up a day past the deadline, she'd send a violation notice. And God help you if your grass wasn't exactly 2 inches high. She once forced a neighbor to resod their entire lawn for being a shade too yellow. I moved into Willow Creek thinking it was the perfect neighborhood, quiet, safe, close to work. But I had no idea that the biggest threat to my peace wasn't crime or noise, it was Karen. I'd managed to avoid her wrath for a while, but the moment she spotted my ambulance parked in my driveway, she saw a new battle to fight. That night, I had just finished an exhausting shift. After 12 hours of back-to-back calls, dealing with everything from heart attacks to car wrecks, all I wanted was to sleep. But the moment I stepped out of my vehicle, there she was, standing in the cul-de-sac like a sheriff about to lay down the law. Arms crossed, lips pursed, tapping one spotless white sneaker against the pavement as though my mere existence was an inconvenience. "I've warned you before," she said, voice loud enough for the whole street to hear. "This is a private community, and we have rules." She stabbed a manicured finger toward my clearly marked emergency response vehicle. "That thing," she hissed, "is a commercial vehicle. And commercial vehicles are not allowed overnight." I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I had dealt with HOA types before, but Karen was different. She didn't just enforce the rules, she lived for them, treating HOA guidelines like divine law. "It's not a commercial vehicle, Karen," I said evenly. "It's an ambulance. I'm a paramedic. Sometimes, I have to be on call overnight. I need to be able to leave at a moment's notice." Her expression twisted, as if I'd just handed her a lemon to chew on. "That's not my problem," she snapped. "The HOA has clear regulations, and you agreed to abide by them when you moved here." I exhaled sharply. "I moved here before you were elected," I pointed out. "No one had an issue with my ambulance until you took over." Her eyes flashed, I'd struck a nerve. "I don't make exceptions," she said coldly. "If it's here tomorrow morning, it will be towed. Final warning." And just like that, she spun on her heel and marched back to her house, leaving me standing there, fists clenched, heart pounding. I had moved to this neighborhood for peace. But now, thanks to Karen, it was a battlefield. By the time I finally dragged myself into bed that night, my body was beyond exhausted, but my mind wouldn't shut off. I knew Karen wasn't bluffing. She was the type to wake up before sunrise just to call a tow truck out of spite. The thought made my blood boil. This wasn't some abandoned RV or a work truck blocking a fire lane, I was parking a life-saving emergency vehicle in my own driveway. But logic never worked with people like her. Karen didn't care about safety, only about control. I thought about moving the ambulance to a nearby public parking lot, but the idea made my stomach turn. What if an emergency call came in and I lost precious minutes running to get my vehicle? What if someone died because Karen didn't like how my driveway looked? No, I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. I refused to let her win. I set my alarm for dawn, determined to get outside before she could do anything, but it turned out Karen had already made her move. I woke up to the sound of an engine rumbling outside. My gut clenched, I bolted out of bed, yanked open the blinds, and felt my stomach drop. A tow truck was already backing into my driveway, my ambulance, my lifeline, was about to be taken. I threw on a pair of sweats and sprinted outside, waving my arms. "Hey! Stop!" The driver barely spared me a glance as he lowered the hydraulic lift. "I got a call this morning. Said this vehicle is in violation of HOA regulations." I didn't need to ask who called. You can't tow an emergency vehicle, I snapped, heart pounding. That's not just HOA nonsense, that's illegal. The driver scratched his head, glancing toward Karen's house. The curtains twitched, she was watching. Smug. Waiting, asterisk asterisk. Look, man, the tow driver sighed. She paid extra for a rush job. If you got a problem, take it up with the HOA. I clenched my fists so tight my nails dug into my palms. This was insanity. Karen had woken up at dawn just to make sure my ambulance was gone before I could fight back. Then my radio crackled. Police car light code blue. Unresponsive male. Possible cardiac event asterisk asterisk. My breath hitched. Round pushpin 126 Willow Creek Drive. I felt like the ground had just vanished beneath me. That was inside the HOA that was barely 2 blocks away, that was. The HOA president's house. I didn't have time to argue. I turned and ran. Hashtag hashtag hashtag. By the time I reached Thomas Gentry's house, a small crowd had already gathered in the driveway. Panicked voices filled the air. His wife, Margaret, stood by the garage, frantically gripping her phone. He's not breathing, she screamed into the phone. Where the hell is the ambulance? My stomach twisted. I should have been here already. I shoved my way through the crowd. I'm a paramedic. Where is he? Margaret's head snapped up, her eyes wild with desperation. Inside. Living room. I sprinted through the front door, my boots thudding against the hardwood floor. Thomas Gentry was sprawled on the couch, his face ashen, lips tinged blue, his chest barely moved. His pulse, weak, thready. Seconds away from flatlining. I dropped to my knees, ripping open my med bag. Sir. Can you hear me? Nothing. I pressed my fingers against his carotid artery, barely there. My brain snapped into autopilot. I yanked out my stethoscope, listened for breath sounds, prepped the defibrillator. Then a voice cut through the chaos. Excuse me, but what is this ambulance doing here? My blood ran cold. I turned my head, and there she was. Karen. Standing in the doorway, arms crossed, looking irritated. This vehicle, she continued, her voice rising over the panicked murmurs of the neighbors, should not be parked here. We have a policy about. Asterisk asterisk not now, Karen, asterisk asterisk, someone snapped. She ignored them. Stepping forward. Blocking my space asterisk asterisk. I had zero patience left. Karen, I said, barely looking up as I grabbed the defibrillator from my bag, I'm performing an emergency intervention. Get out of the way. Instead of moving, she planted herself inches from me, her lips curling in disgust. Well, I'm sorry, but emergency or not, this is private property, and we have rules, there are proper ways to handle these things and you're blocking. Asterisk asterisk he's not breathing, Karen, asterisk asterisk, someone shouted. She scowled. And I'm trying to enforce community guidelines. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The actual president of the HOA was dying in front of her, and she was worried about a parking violation. I tuned her out, pressed the defibrillator pads to Gentry's chest. Clear. His body jerked with the shock. No stable rhythm. Come on, I muttered. Checked his vitals, prepped another charge. Then a shadow passed over me. I looked up just in time to see Karen reaching for my radio. My heart stopped. She was trying to turn it off. You're disrupting the peace, she huffed, grabbing at it. For a split second, I considered knocking her hand away, but before I could react, a furious voice boomed through the room. Karen, what the hell are you doing? Everything stopped. The HOA president's eyes snapped open. Weak. But conscious, asterisk asterisk. And just like that, everything changed. A sharp, wheezing breath rattled through Thomas Gentry's chest as his eyes fluttered open, unfocused but undeniably aware. His gaze locked onto Karen, and for a split second, I saw the exact moment it hit her, the realization that he had witnessed everything. Karen took an instinctive step back, her lips parting as if to talk her way out of it, but before she could even breathe a word, Gentry's hoarse, rasping voice filled the room. Asterisk asterisk, you tried to stop them, asterisk asterisk. Karen straightened so fast you'd think her spine had turned to steel. No, I was just. Asterisk asterisk, I saw you, asterisk asterisk. Gentry's voice, though weak, carried a weight that silenced the entire room. His wife, Margaret, let out a choked breath, staring at Karen like she'd just seen a snake in her own home. Karen's eyes darted around, searching for some escape, but there was none. The neighbors who had once feared her, asterisk asterisk, tiptoeing around her ridiculous rules, living under her reign of pettiness and fines, asterisk asterisk, were all staring now, their expressions a mixture of disgust, shock, and something else she had never seen before. Rage. I adjusted the four-line, keeping my focus on Gentry. Sir, you need to stay calm, I said, my voice steady despite the tension pressing down on the room. We're getting you to the hospital now. But Gentry wasn't looking at me anymore. His stare was fixed only on her. Karen, he coughed, what the hell were you thinking? I didn't realize, she stammered. Margaret's voice cut through the thick air like a knife. Didn't realize? You tried to have his ambulance towed, she whirled on Karen, voice trembling with fury. He could have died, and you were worried about parking violations? Karen's face drained of color. The wail of sirens outside was a welcome sound. I didn't look at Karen again as I helped load Gentry onto the stretcher, my focus entirely on keeping him stable. But he never took his eyes off her, not once. The back doors slammed shut, and I hopped into the ambulance, barely noticing as Karen somehow wormed her way inside, claiming she was needed for HOA business. But there was no power in her voice anymore. Gentry was weak, but when he finally spoke again, his voice was like a hammer to glass. Officer, he croaked, blinking heavily at the paramedic assisting him. I want her held accountable. Karen flinched as if the words had struck her physically. Sir, that's not necessary, she started, but the doors had already opened again. And standing there, waiting for her, was a police officer. Excuse me, he said, stepping forward, badge flashing under the hospital's fluorescent lights. We received a report of interference with emergency medical services. Karen let out a breathless laugh, one that sounded dangerously close to hysteria. I didn't delay anything, she blurted, looking around, trying to find anyone to back her up. But no one did. I stepped past her, my focus on my patient, not the mess unraveling behind me. As I walked away, I heard the unmistakable click of handcuffs being unclipped from a belt. By the time the emergency HOA meeting was called, the neighborhood had turned into a war zone. The clubhouse, usually a half-empty shell where Karen held her court, was now packed wall to wall. Homeowners filled every chair, stood against the walls, even leaned against the doors to listen. In the back, a few reporters had slipped in, sensing blood in the water. The tension was electric. Karen sat at the front, flanked by her few remaining loyalists, her jaw set, hands gripping the table as if it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Across from her, Thomas Gentry, now released from the hospital but visibly weak, sat with his arms folded, his expression unreadable. I took a seat near the front, ignoring the murmurs around me. This meeting wasn't about me. This was Karen's reckoning. The moment the HOA board chair opened the meeting, Karen shot up, her voice shrill, forced, louder than necessary. I have done nothing wrong, she declared, eyes darting to the crowd as if pleading for support. I was enforcing community guidelines, which is my job, and now I'm being dragged through the mud because a few people are overreacting? A sharp intake of breath rippled through the room. Asterisk asterisk overreacting, Gentry's voice, though low, cut through the air like a blade. He turned his head, looking at her with the kind of disgust that made people squirm. Karen, I was dying, and you actively tried to stop the paramedics from helping me. That is not what happened, she snapped, forcing a laugh, the sound hollow. And it's ridiculous to suggest that I. She whipped toward me, her eyes narrowing like a cornered animal about to make a desperate move. Tell them, she demanded. Tell them I wasn't interfering, that I was just asking about the parking policy, and it was all a misunderstanding. The room went still. All eyes turned to me. I took a slow breath. That's not what happened, I said, my voice steady. You didn't just question the parking policy. I kept my gaze locked on hers. You physically tried to turn off my radio while I was treating a critical patient, A collective murmur spread through the room. Karen flinched, but she wasn't done yet. I was confused, she insisted, her voice higher pitched now, more desperate. I didn't realize how serious it was, and I cut her off. And you called a tow truck while I was inside, fighting to save his life. That was it. The final nail. The room erupted. People shouted over each other, furious, disbelieving. A woman near the back stood up, her voice shaking. That could have been my husband, that could have been my child. She's been power-hungry for years, another neighbor chimed in. She doesn't care about safety, only control. Karen's face was turning bright red, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. This is a witch hunt, she shrieked. I've given years of service to this community, and now I'm being attacked because a few people don't like me? She spun toward Gentry, her voice trembling with desperation. You can't do this. I've been loyal to you. I've done everything to. Karen, Gentry's voice was like ice. He turned to the board, his expression resolute. I'm calling for an immediate vote to remove Karen Roberts from the HOA. Permanently. The air crackled with anticipation. Karen's eyes darted around the room, realization dawning, too late. She had lost control. And for the first time in her life, she knew it. Silence hung in the air for a single, heavy moment before chaos erupted. Shouts rang out, neighbors talking over one another, some demanding Karen be removed immediately, others just trying to process the sheer insanity of what had just unfolded. Karen, who had spent years lording over these people, fining them for minor infractions, terrorizing them with her endless rules, was now completely powerless. One of her former allies, an HOA board member named Greg Stanton, stood up, visibly uncomfortable. His voice wavered, but he pushed through, unwilling to stand beside Karen any longer. I second the motion, he said. For an immediate vote. Karen's head snapped toward him so fast it was a miracle her neck didn't break. Greg, she gasped, her voice cracking. You can't be serious. But he wouldn't even look at her. Another voice cut through the murmurs, Margaret Gentry, I support the motion. Karen turned even paler. She spun toward the crowd, desperately scanning the room, searching for someone, anyone, to back her up. No one did. I watched as the reality of it finally hit her. For the first time, she had no power over these people. One by one, the HOA board members raised their hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. It was unanimous. Karen's reign was over. Her mouth fell open. Wait. No. You can't do this. She shot to her feet, slamming her hands onto the table like a desperate queen trying to cling to her throne. I have given years to this community. I built this place, Gentry cut her off. You've embarrassed this HOA, endangered a life, and interfered with emergency medical care. He turned to the board. Effective immediately, Karen Roberts is removed from her position as HOA president. The clubhouse exploded. People cheered, some actually clapping, others shaking their heads in sheer disbelief that it had taken this long. Karen stood there, shaking, eyes wild. "You can't do this," she whispered, but no one was listening anymore. I stood, ready to leave, ready to walk away from the disaster that had once been her iron-fisted rule. But she wasn't done. ####. Hours later, I was at home, just about to turn in for the night, when my radio buzzed. 911 Dispatch, Unit 4, we have a possible cardiac event at 300 Willow Creek Drive. I frowned. Another emergency? I grabbed my gear and bolted outside, fully prepared for another fight for someone's life, but when I pulled up to the house, I immediately realized, something wasn't right. The front door was wide open, but there was no panic, no screaming, no neighbors gathered outside. I stepped inside, my heart already pounding with suspicion, and then I saw her. Karen. Sitting on her pristine white couch, perfectly fine, arms crossed, a smug look on her face. "You're late," she said, like this was a business meeting instead of an emergency response. I stood frozen for a second, trying to process the audacity of what I was witnessing. Then it clicked. She faked the emergency. I felt rage coil in my stomach. "You wasted an emergency dispatch." She shrugged, as if it was nothing. I needed to make a point. A point? My voice came out sharp, incredulous. "You made a fake 911 call, to prove a point?" She lifted her chin, still pretending she had control, that she hadn't just fallen lower than anyone thought possible. "Well," she said, crossing her arms, "at least now the ambulance is parked in an approved space." I stared at her. She wasn't just controlling, she was unhinged. Karen thought she was being clever, but she had just made the worst mistake of her life. Because now? She wasn't just facing the wrath of the HOA. She had committed a criminal offense. ####. The police arrived within 15 minutes. Karen, to her absolute horror, was not met with sympathy. "You made a fraudulent emergency call," Officer Daniels told her, his tone clipped and professional. "That's a felony in this state, Ms. Roberts." Karen let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "Oh, come on. This is ridiculous." "No, Ms. Roberts," Daniels said. ***, what you did was ridiculous, ***. She stiffened. "You can't." "Yes, we can." He pulled out a piece of paper, unfolding it slowly. "And seeing as this is the second interference report involving you in 24 hours, you're officially under investigation." Her whole body went stiff. Daniels handed her the notice. "You'll need to come down to the station for questioning." Her fingers trembled as she took the paper. I watched, silent, as the last of her bravado cracked. The HOA had turned against her. Her reputation was in ruins. And now? She was officially a criminal suspect. The last thing I heard before I walked away was the sound of Karen Roberts trying, and failing, to argue her way out of it. No one was listening anymore. Karen's downfall wasn't swift, but it was absolute. Over the next few weeks, she fought desperately to claw back any shred of authority, but it was useless. The HOA board erased every ridiculous rule she had ever put in place. The ban on work trucks? Gone. The absurd fine for leaving trash cans out more than 30 minutes? Erased. In what could only be described as poetic justice, the board even granted me an official exemption to park my ambulance in my driveway permanently. I made sure it stayed in full view of Karen's house, not that she had much fight left in her anymore. Her real problems weren't with the HOA, though. Her legal battles began stacking up faster than she could handle. The $10,000 fine was just the start. The community service? A constant reminder that she had once been the most feared person in the neighborhood, and now she was picking up litter on the same streets where she used to issue violations. The worst part for her, though? The permanent HOA ban. She would never, ever be allowed on another board again. All that power she had wielded so mercilessly, gone. Then, one day, the for sale sign appeared in her yard. Everyone knew what it meant. Karen was done. Between the fines, the lawsuits, and the fact that no one in the community wanted her there anymore, she had no choice but to leave. At first, she tried to play it off, acting as though this was her decision, but no one bought it. The neighborhood celebrated. Someone even hung a banner across the cul-de-sac, HOA Freedom Day. I half expected Karen to come storming out of her house, demanding it be taken down, but she never did. She kept her blinds shut, her car hidden in the garage, her presence reduced to a ghost of the tyrant she once was. But the real sting came later. Her house wouldn't sell. Word had gotten out about who she was, what she had done, and suddenly, no one wanted to live in the house where the most hated HOA president had once ruled. She was forced to sell at a loss. The last time I saw her, she was standing on her porch, watching as the moving trucks pulled away. No one said goodbye. No one cared where she was going. For years, Karen had used power to destroy lives, enforcing rules just because she could. And now? She had nothing. No authority. No reputation. No home. She had spent her entire life controlling others, but when karma finally came for her, there was no one left to save her. Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare like Karen? Or do you have a worse story? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.